In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, life moved at a gentle pace. The streets were lined with tall trees that shaded cozy homes, and kids could often be seen riding their bikes or playing catch in the cul-de-sacs. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved hello, front porches were decorated for every holiday, and everyone seemed to know each other, at least on the surface. But beneath this picture-perfect exterior, there was an undercurrent of tension, simmering within the community. And right at the center of it all was one woman who took neighborhood rules very seriously. Patricia, but known to most as Karen, had lived in Willow Creek for over a decade. She was the type of person who always made sure everything looked just right. Her lawn was perfectly manicured. Her flower beds were immaculate, and her mailbox stood straight and shiny like a soldier at attention. To Karen, maintaining these high standards wasn't just about appearances. It was a mission. As the head of the Homeowners Association, HOA, she saw herself as the guardian of the neighborhood's charm and order. If someone hung Christmas lights too early or let their trash cans sit out past collection day, you could bet Karen would be knocking on their door with a clipboard and a list of infractions. But not everyone shared Karen's enthusiasm for perfection. Enter James Anderson, a newcomer to Willow Creek. A decorated Army veteran, James had recently moved into the area with his wife and 2 young daughters. After years of service overseas, he was looking forward to settling into a peaceful life, away from conflict. He loved the idea of raising his family in such a serene environment, where weekends meant barbecues and laughter filled the air. What he didn't expect, however, was how quickly his small oversight would turn his world upside down. James' first few weeks in Willow Creek went smoothly enough. His family unpacked boxes, explored nearby parks, and tried to adjust to their new routine. But soon, James started noticing little things, a note taped to his front door here, a disapproving glance from Karen there. At first, he brushed it off, thinking maybe he'd accidentally broken some unwritten rule without realizing it. Then came the letter. One crisp autumn morning, as James stepped outside to grab the newspaper, he spotted an official-looking envelope stuck to his door. It was from the HOA, signed by none other than Karen herself. The message inside was blunt. James' mailbox was non-compliant and needed immediate fixing. According to Karen, its slightly crooked stance and chipped paint were violations of the HOA guidelines. She gave him 48 hours to fix it or else face fines. James sighed deeply as he read the note. He hadn't even been in the neighborhood for a month, and already he felt like he was being singled out. Between juggling work deadlines, helping his kids settle into school, and trying to spend quality time with his wife, the last thing on his mind was a mailbox. Still, he figured it wouldn't hurt to address the issue eventually. After all, he didn't want to cause any trouble. So he tucked the letter away, promising himself he'd get around to it when life slowed down a bit. But life rarely slows down, especially for someone like James. Days turned into weeks, and the mailbox remained untouched. Each passing day only fueled Karen's growing frustration. To her, James' lack of action wasn't just laziness, it was a direct challenge to her authority. She began leaving more notes, each one harsher than the last. When those failed to elicit a response, she escalated to verbal confrontations whenever they crossed paths. Her tone was sharp, her words clipped, and her demeanor icy. Neighbors couldn't help but notice the tension building between them. Some residents sympathized with Karen. They admired her dedication to keeping Willow Creek pristine and believed James should have fixed the problem sooner. Others, however, found her behavior excessive. They whispered among themselves about how unfair it seemed to target a veteran who clearly had bigger priorities than a mailbox. Despite the differing opinions, one thing was certain. The feud between James and Karen was becoming impossible to ignore. Then, One evening, something happened that changed everything. James arrived home after a long day at work to find his driveway littered with unopened envelopes. Bills, letters, and packages lay scattered across the ground, torn open or crumpled as if someone had carelessly tossed them aside. Among the mess, he spotted a critical document from the VA regarding his disability benefits. Panic set in as he realized what this meant. Not only had someone tampered with his mail, but important information might now be lost forever. Confused and furious, James reviewed the security footage from his home camera system. What he saw left him speechless. There, captured in grainy but undeniable detail, was Karen casually dumping his mail into a trash bin outside his house. Watching her nonchalant expression as she carried out the act sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't just a disagreement over neighborhood rules anymore, it was personal. And James knew he couldn't let it slide. What started as a minor dispute over a mailbox had spiraled into something far more serious. Little did anyone know, this incident would become the talk of the town and spark a chain reaction no one could have predicted. James couldn't believe what he was seeing on the screen. The video footage showed Karen standing near his mailbox, casually picking up the pile of mail and dumping it into a trash bin like it was nothing more than junk. Her face didn't show any hint of guilt or hesitation. It was almost mechanical, as if she truly thought she had the right to do this. James felt a mix of emotions bubbling inside him: anger, disbelief, and even a strange sadness that someone could act so coldly toward another person. He sat there for a while, staring at the frozen image on his laptop. What was he supposed to do now? This wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. This was about something much bigger. His mind raced with questions. How could anyone think it was okay to throw away someone else's mail? Did she not realize how important those letters were? Or did she simply not care? Worse still, what kind of message did this send to the rest of the neighborhood? The next morning, James decided to take action. He gathered all the scattered pieces of mail from his driveway and carefully sorted through them. Some envelopes were torn, others damp from lying outside overnight, but thankfully, most of the contents seemed intact. Among the stack was the critical letter from the VAA document he'd been waiting weeks to receive. It contained updates about his disability benefits, something he relied on to support his family after years of service. Losing that letter would have been devastating. With shaking hands, James picked up his phone and called the local post office. When he explained what had happened, the representative sounded shocked. "That's illegal," they told him firmly. "Tampering with someone else's mail is a federal offense. You need to report this to the authorities immediately." Hearing those words made James's stomach drop. Illegal? He knew Karen was overzealous, but he never imagined her actions could cross such a serious line. After hanging up, James took a deep breath and dialed the police department. Reporting a neighbor felt surreal, almost surreal, but he knew it was the right thing to do. When the officer arrived later that day, James showed them the security footage. The officer watched silently, their expression growing grimmer with each passing second. "We'll look into this," they said finally, taking notes. "This isn't something we can ignore." Word spread quickly in Willow Creek. By the time James returned home from filing the report, whispers about the incident were already circulating among neighbors. Some people approached him directly, asking if the rumors were true. Others avoided eye contact altogether, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating drama. A few close neighbors offered their support, telling James they thought Karen had gone too far this time. One elderly woman who lived 2 doors down even brought over a fresh-baked pie as a gesture of solidarity. "Don't let her get to you," she said kindly. "You're doing the right thing." But not everyone sided with James. There were plenty of residents who defended Karen, insisting she was only trying to enforce the rules. If he had fixed his mailbox like everyone else, none of this would have happened, one man muttered. During a casual conversation at the coffee shop, another neighbor chimed in saying she's just doing her job. People need to stop making such a big deal out of everything. These comments stung, but James tried not to let them bother him. He reminded himself that he hadn't done anything wrong, and neither had his family. As days passed, the tension in the neighborhood grew thicker. Karen, unaware that James had reported her, continued her usual routine. She walked her dog, watered her plants, and attended HOA meetings as if nothing unusual had occurred. But behind closed doors, she must have sensed the shift in dynamics. Neighbors who once greeted her warmly now exchanged awkward glances when she passed by. Conversations stopped mid-sentence whenever she entered a room. Even the HOA board members seemed hesitant to engage with her, unsure of how to handle the fallout. Meanwhile, James found himself struggling to focus on anything else. Every time he stepped outside, he felt eyes on him, some sympathetic, others judgmental. His kids noticed the change too. They came home from school one day complaining that classmates had teased them about their lazy dad, who couldn't keep his mailbox straight. James's heart sank hearing this. He hated that his children were being dragged into an adult conflict they didn't understand. That night, he sat down with his wife and shared his fears. "I don't want this to define us," he admitted quietly, "but I also can't let it go. Not when it's this serious." His wife nodded in agreement. "We'll get through this together," she reassured him. "And maybe, just maybe, something good will come out of it." What James didn't know yet was how far-reaching the consequences of Karen's actions would be. Within days, postal inspectors got involved, launching a formal investigation into the tampering incident. News outlets caught wind of the story, eager to report on the bizarre feud between a homeowners association enforcer and a decorated veteran. Headlines began popping up online. HOA leader throws out veteran's mail. Mailbox war turns ugly. Veteran fights back against overzealous neighbor. Karen quickly became the center of attention, not the kind she enjoyed. Reporters camped outside her house, hoping to catch a comment. Social media exploded with memes mocking her behavior, dubbing her the HOA Karen. Strangers left scathing reviews on her personal profiles, calling her everything from selfish to heartless. For someone who prided herself on order and respectability, the sudden scrutiny was unbearable. Still, Karen refused to back down. When questioned by investigators, she initially denied touching James's mail, claiming the footage must have been edited or staged. But the evidence was clear, and her denials only made her look worse. As the pressure mounted, cracks began to show in her polished facade. Friends distanced themselves, and even her own family seemed embarrassed by the situation. Yet, despite the mounting evidence against her, Karen remained defiant, accusing James of exaggerating the issue for attention. For James, the whirlwind of attention was overwhelming. On one hand, he appreciated the support pouring in from veterans groups, community advocates, and ordinary citizens outraged by Karen's actions. On the other hand, he worried about the toll it was taking on his family. His wife stayed strong, shielding their daughters from the worst of the gossip, but James could see the stress etched on her face. Late at night, after the kids were asleep, they talked about what might happen next. Would Karen face consequences? Would the neighborhood ever feel normal again? And most importantly, how could they use this experience to create positive change? Despite the chaos, James held on to hope. He believed that sometimes adversity brings opportunities for growth, not just for individuals, but for entire communities. If nothing else, this ordeal had shown him that standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult, is always worth it. Little did he know, the battle was far from over, and the real test of character was yet to come. The investigation into the mailbox feud quickly gained momentum, and it wasn't long before federal postal inspectors stepped in. Tampering with someone's mail isn't just a minor offense. It's a serious crime under U.S. law. Mail is considered federal property, and interfering with it can lead to hefty fines or even jail time. For Karen, this reality was about to hit hard. At first, she tried to downplay the situation. When questioned by authorities, she insisted that James was blowing things out of proportion. "It's just a mailbox," she told anyone who would listen. "He's making a mountain out of a molehill." But the security footage from James's camera painted a very different picture. The video clearly showed her tossing his mail into the trash without a second thought. There was no denying what she had done. As the evidence piled up, Karen's excuses started to crumble. Her attempts to claim the footage was fake or manipulated fell flat when investigators confirmed its authenticity. Even her closest allies in the HOA began distancing themselves, realizing they didn't want to be associated with someone accused of such blatant wrongdoing. The once respected neighborhood enforcer was now seen as reckless and entitled, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for: Karen's arrest. One chilly November morning, 2 officers showed up at her doorstep with handcuffs. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as she was led outside, her face flushed with embarrassment. Cameras flashed, capturing every step of her walk of shame. Reporters shouted questions, but Karen remained silent, her head bowed low. The image of her being taken away went viral almost instantly, sparking reactions across social media and news outlets nationwide. For many residents of Willow Creek, watching Karen get arrested was surreal. Some felt a sense of vindication, believing justice had finally been served. Others were shocked that the situation had escalated so far. A few still defended her, arguing that throwing someone's mail away didn't warrant an arrest. "It's not like she killed anyone," one neighbor muttered during a tense conversation at the local grocery store. But for most people, the gravity of her actions sank in when they learned more about James's background. James wasn't just any homeowner, he was a decorated veteran who had sacrificed years of his life serving the country. The fact that Karen had targeted him, of all people, struck a nerve with many. Veterans groups rallied around James, using the incident to highlight broader issues of disrespect toward service members. They pointed out how veterans often struggle to reintegrate into civilian life, facing challenges like PTSD, financial strain, and difficulty finding stable employment. To them, Karen's behavior symbolized a lack of gratitude and understanding for the sacrifices veterans make. Despite the growing support, the ordeal took a toll on James and his family. His wife worked tirelessly to shield their daughters from the worst of the drama, but it was impossible to completely protect them. At school, the girls faced teasing and hurtful comments from classmates. "Your dad got our neighbor arrested," one boy taunted during recess. James's heart broke hearing these stories. He never wanted his children to feel caught in the middle of something so ugly. Late at night, after the kids were asleep, James and his wife would sit together, talking about everything that had happened. She reminded him that he was doing the right thing, even if it came at a cost. "You stood up not just for yourself, but for everyone who deserves respect," she said. "That matters more than anything." But standing up for himself didn't mean James enjoyed the spotlight. In fact, he found the constant attention exhausting. Strangers reached out to him daily, some offering words of encouragement, others asking for interviews or photos. Local TV stations invited him to share his story, and veterans organizations asked him to speak at events. While he appreciated the support, James worried about becoming a public figure. He didn't want this incident to define him or overshadow the quiet life he'd hoped to build with his family. Amid the chaos, the HOA scrambled to distance itself from Karen. Board members held emergency meetings to discuss damage control, issuing a formal apology to James and pledging to review their policies. It promised to focus less on nitpicky rules and more on fostering a sense of community. Behind closed doors, however, tension simmered. Some members criticized Karen for bringing shame to the organization, while others quietly sympathized with her plight. The rift within the HOA reflected the larger divide in the neighborhood, where opinions remained split. For Karen, the aftermath of her arrest was devastating. Once admired for her dedication to keeping Willow Creek pristine, she now faced widespread ridicule and isolation. Friends stopped returning her calls, and neighbors avoided her at all costs. Even her own family seemed unsure how to handle the situation. Her husband reportedly begged her to apologize publicly, hoping to salvage some shred of dignity, but Karen refused. Stubborn to the end, she clung to her belief that she was justified in enforcing the rules, even if it meant crossing legal. Boundaries dotted as weeks turned into months, the case against Karen moved forward. Facing mounting pressure, she eventually pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges of mail tampering. The judge sentenced her to probation and ordered her to complete community service hours. While some felt the punishment was too lenient, others saw it as a wake-up call, a chance for Karen to reflect on her actions and make amends. For James, the resolution brought mixed emotions. On one hand, he was relieved to see accountability. Knowing that Karen couldn't simply brush off her behavior gave him a sense of closure. On the other hand, he couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Watching someone lose everything they cared about, respect, friendships, and even their role in the HOA was heartbreaking, no matter how much harm they had caused. Still, James knew this experience had changed him in profound ways. It forced him to confront the harsh realities of conflict and the importance of standing up for oneself. More importantly, it inspired him to use his platform for good. With the support of veterans, groups, and community advocates, he began speaking out about the challenges veterans face when transitioning back to civilian life. He also pushed for reforms within the HOA, urging them to adopt fairer and more compassionate policies. Slowly but surely, life in Willow Creek began to return to normal, or at least a new version of normal. Neighbors who had avoided each other during the height of the feud started reconnecting, realizing how much they valued their community. James and his family focused on rebuilding their lives, cherishing the moments of peace and joy they had fought so hard to protect. Though scars from the ordeal remained, James chose to focus on the positives. He had stood up for himself, exposed wrongdoing, and sparked meaningful conversations about respect and accountability. And perhaps most importantly, he had shown his daughters the value of integrity even when it comes at a cost. Months after the storm of headlines and heated discussions, Willow Creek finally began to settle into a new rhythm. Life hadn't returned to exactly how it was before. Some scars ran too deep for that, but there was a sense of calm, a collective exhale after months of tension. For James, this period marked both an ending and a beginning. The legal battle with Karen had concluded, but its impact lingered, shaping not just his family's future but also the neighborhood as a whole. Karen completed her community service hours quietly, keeping mostly to herself. She avoided public gatherings and rarely spoke unless absolutely necessary. Neighbors who once sought her advice now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. It wasn't cruelty. They weren't trying to punish her further, but rather discomfort. Seeing someone fall so far from grace made people uneasy. Still, there were moments when glimpses of the old Karen surfaced. At a neighborhood cleanup event organized by the newly formed Unity Committee, she showed up unannounced, wearing gloves and carrying trash bags. Her presence startled some residents, but no one confronted her. Instead, they let her work alongside them in silence, picking up litter and pruning overgrown bushes. James noticed her there from a distance but chose not to approach her. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a strange mix of pity and detachment. Over time, he'd come to understand that Karen wasn't inherently evil. She was just someone who had let her obsession with control spiral out of hand. Watching her humbly contribute to the cleanup reminded him that people can change if they're willing to try, whether Karen's efforts were genuine or an attempt to redeem herself. James decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was taking steps, however small, toward making amends. The Unity Committee became a cornerstone of Willow Creek's recovery. Spearheaded by a group of passionate residents, including James, the committee worked tirelessly to mend fences and foster connection. They hosted regular events designed to bring neighbors together: summer barbecues, book clubs, even outdoor movie nights where families could gather under the stars. These initiatives might have seemed simple, but their effect was profound. Slowly, conversation shifted from gossip and division to shared laughter and collaboration. People started looking out for one another again, lending tools, offering rides, and checking in on elderly neighbors. For James's family, these changes brought a renewed sense of belonging. His daughters, who had once dreaded going to school because of teasing, now eagerly joined in neighborhood activities. One weekend, during a community art project, they helped paint a mural on the side of the local recreation center. The design featured a tree with sprawling branches, each leaf bearing the name of a resident who had contributed. James stood back, watching his girls giggle as they dipped brushes into buckets of paint, their faces streaked with color. In that moment, he felt a wave of gratitude, not just for the support they'd received, but for the resilience they'd shown throughout the ordeal. James himself found purpose in advocacy. Encouraged by the veterans groups that had rallied around him, he began speaking at events across the county. His talks focused on the challenges veterans face when reintegrating into civilian life, emphasizing the importance of community support. "We serve our country with pride," he often said, "but coming home shouldn't mean fighting another battle alone." His words resonated deeply with audiences, many of whom approached him afterward to share their own stories. Some were veterans struggling to find their footing. Others were civilians wanting to help but unsure how. James listened to each person with patience and empathy, offering advice when asked and simply being present when words weren't enough. Back in Willow Creek, the HOA underwent significant reforms. The board implemented new policies prioritizing flexibility and compassion over rigid enforcement. Mailboxes, once a source of contention, became symbols of creativity and individuality. Residents were encouraged to personalize theirs, turning what had been a point of conflict into an opportunity for self-expression. James's mailbox, painted with bold stripes of red, white, and blue, stood proudly at the end of his driveway, a testament to resilience and hope. Even Corinne, though still largely isolated, found ways to contribute positively. She volunteered at the local library, organizing bookshelves and assisting with children's reading programs. While she never publicly apologized for her actions, her quiet efforts spoke volumes. One evening, during a neighborhood potluck, she approached James, hesitantly, holding a plate of cookies. "I baked these," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. "Thought maybe your girls would like them." James accepted the gesture graciously, thanking her with a nod. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even closure, but it was a start. As the seasons changed, so did Willow Creek. The chill of winter gave way to the warmth of spring, and with it came a renewed spirit of cooperation. Neighbors worked together to plant flower beds along the main road, creating a vibrant welcome for anyone entering the area. Children played freely in the streets, their laughter echoing through the air. Even the HOA meetings, once tense and contentious, became spaces for open dialogue and mutual understanding. James reflected on everything that had happened as he sat on his porch one sunny afternoon, sipping coffee and watching his daughters chase each other around the yard. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with moments of doubt and heartache, but it had also taught him valuable lessons about courage, perseverance, and the power of standing up for what's right. Most importantly, it had reminded him of the strength of community, not just in times of celebration, but in times of struggle. Willow Creek wasn't perfect. It probably never would be, but it was stronger because of what its residents had endured. The mailbox feud had exposed cracks in the foundation of trust and respect, but it had also given everyone a chance to rebuild something better. And for James, that was worth every challenge they'd faced. In the end, the story of the HOA Karen served as a reminder that conflicts, no matter how trivial they may seem at first, can reveal deeper truths about human nature. It showed that accountability matters, that kindness is powerful, and that healing takes time, but it's always possible. For James and his family, Willow Creek had become more than just a place to live. It was home, a place where they could grow, connect, and thrive, despite the storms they weathered along the way.